Good morning, friends. Welcome to the Immanuel 10 at 10. We're having a snow day today. We got about 3 or 4 inches of really um, packable snow last night. And rather than just shove it off to the side, since I don't have a snowblower, I decided to pile it all up for our kids. I don't know if you can see it very well, but I made a big pile and another one out back so our kids can create something cool with the snow today. Well, we are reading through the Bible together in 2021 using the One Year Chronological Bible. That puts all the Bible stories in about the order that they happen. So if you want to read along with us, we have reading plans available online on a table in our church lobby and in our monthly newsletter and our email that we send out each week so that you can use your own Bible. If you'd like to get a copy of the NLT One Year Chronological Bible for yourself so that you just have all the readings right in a row, we can order one for you for $15. So just let us know that. You can also find the plan at Bible.com and on the YouVersion app. And you can get it as a Kindle or an ebook or an audiobook too if you want somebody to read it to you. Reading through the Bible is a great way for us to walk together in hope in 2021. So in the second week here, we covered a lot more of Genesis and little bits of First Chronicles along the way, continuing the saga of the family of Abraham. Isaac repeats the mistakes of his father Abraham, telling people that his wife is his sister, just like Abraham did twice. Rebekah and Isaac then play favorites with their sons, Esau and Jacob, which naturally leads to conflict. Rebekah has Jacob steal Esau's blessing as well as his inheritance that he was supposed to get as the firstborn son. The blessing that Isaac gives to Jacob is beautiful, but Esau is left only with an anti-blessing, where Jacob is blessed with flocks and herds and authority over his brother and this beautiful blessing. Esau is told, you're going to live far away from the goodness of the land. It's going to be difficult for you. Well, as you can imagine, Esau is furious and Jacob has to run for his life. Our families suffer whenever we play favorites with our love for our children. Well, Jacob, as he's going off into the wilderness, Jacob has this dream where he sees a ladder or a bridge between heaven and earth with angels going up and down on it. Much later, Jesus says that he is the bridge between heaven and earth. Jacob, the trickster, ends up getting tricked by his father-in-law, Laban, into marrying both Leah and Rachel, the one that he loved. And then Jacob's favoritism, preferring Rachel, results in more family conflict. Even, so it's like the two women are having this contest of who can have more children. And when they stop having children of their own, then they have their servant girls sleep with Jacob so that they can have more children. So even though Jacob's 4 wives produced the 12 tribes of Israel, the resulting family drama suggests that one husband and one wife is far better. God chooses even to use the unloved Leah to produce more sons, including Judah, in whose line David and then Jesus are born. Well, later on, even Rachel gets into the act of treachery between Jacob and Laban. Jacob and Laban have been kind of at odds this whole time because Laban tricked him into marrying both of his daughters, and then he changes his wages all sorts of times. And Jacob fights back by somehow using some trickery or some blessing from God to increase his own flocks and herds at the expense of Laban's. And Rachel gets into the act. She steals when finally um, Jacob decides that it's time for him to leave and go back home and face his brother Esau. She steals Laban's household gods and then sits on them in her tent to hide them from him. So it makes me wonder, what little gods do we have in our own families today, in our own lives? What are the things that we put our trust in more than anything else? Martin Luther said, whatever you trust in, whatever you place your heart upon, that is your God, no matter what you say or who you say your God is. Whatever you truly trust and look to for all good, that is your God. Well, along the way back to his homeland, Jacob stops at a place that he calls Mahanaim, God's camp. When I was in college, I got to go to a retreat at a Bible camp in northern Minnesota that they called Mahanaim, God's camp. And it is such a blessing for us here to have Riverside Bible Camp just 2 miles down the road. There's such wonderful ministry partners, and we love having people from there involved in our congregation, especially Chris and Kelly Dahl. Riverside is one of the reasons that my family came here 9 years ago, is we wanted our kids to experience Jesus at such a wonderful camp like that. Well, Jacob, having gotten his revenge on Laban by becoming rich through him through the trickery that I mentioned, and God's blessing in there too. God is amazing at using even tricksters like him to be a blessing to the world. He decides to head home. And so he's got all of his flocks and his herds, and he's bringing them all along. And then he hears that Esau is coming to meet him with 400 men, with a whole army. And so Jacob is afraid. And he craftily sends some flocks and herds ahead of him as a gift to Esau to try and pave over all of the hurt and pain that he had caused. So he sends these flocks and herds ahead of him, gives instructions to the servants that when Esau says, who are you? What are all these flocks and herds? They said, they're a gift to you from your servant Jacob. And then Jacob sends ahead of him all of his wives and his children, the ones that he likes the least out in front, and the ones that he likes the most, Rachel and her sons, last. And then after he's sent them all ahead, he stays back on the other side of the river all by himself for the night. But during the night, he ends up wrestling with this unknown opponent all night long. And when his opponent realizes that it's almost dawn and he doesn't want to be recognized and he's not winning against Jacob, he hits Jacob on the hip and puts his hip out of joint. And then Jacob asks his name and says, I won't tell you my name. Well, then give me a blessing, Jacob says. Bless me. It's like he realizes maybe who this is. His opponent is God, and God gives him a new name. He renames him Israel, which means wrestles with God. And that's a really appropriate name for Jacob, this trickster or heel grabber. Now he is Israel, wrestles with God, because he has wrestled with God and with humans and has prevailed. Our Father in heaven wants us to wrestle with him in prayer, and he wants to bless us. He blesses us even though we don't deserve it, just like Jacob. Well, later, Jacob and Esau meet face to face. And when Esau receives him kindly, Jacob says that seeing his face is like seeing the face of God. A little bit later, we get to a long list of names in the Bible. And there are other places in the Bible where there's lots of names, and our eyes tend to glaze over when we read them, especially when they're repeated almost verbatim right away in First Chronicles or another book. But these names tell the family story of Jacob and Esau and all of their kids. And they explain where important cities and lands got their names. So much of the conflict in the Bible and still today in the Middle East is a long saga of family squabbles. Now, along the way in our readings this week, there were also some really awful things that happened. We hear about the rape of Dinah and her brother's revenge, how they end up killing all of the tribe of the guy who had taken advantage of her. And because of that, they have to leave the area because Jacob says, "You've made us a stench in everyone's nostrils." And later on, Jacob's son Judah refuses to help his daughter-in-law Tamar have a have a child. Her husband has died, and he refuses to give another son to her, as he was supposed to do, to provide a family line through her. And then Tamar decides to take matters into her own hands, dresses up, disguises herself as a prostitute, and sleeps with Judah, her father-in-law, and gets pregnant, and has held on to a gift, a couple of things from him, and when they're about to kill her for acting like a prostitute, uh, she says, "Well, here is the ring and the staff from the guy who got me pregnant." And Judah realizes, "You're more in the right than I was. I didn't do what was right, and you are in the right." Well, then we get into the long story of Joseph, which takes up more than a third of the book of Genesis. Uh, Joseph is the youngest of all of these brothers, or the second youngest, and he has these grandiose dreams where a, his sheaf of wheat in the field stands up straight, and all of his brothers' sheaves bow down to him. And he has another dream where uh, he is a star, and 11 other stars and the sun and the moon all bow to him. And his brothers become furious. "How dare you think that we would bow down to you, little brother?" And so they scheme, they think about even killing him, but finally they sell him instead into slavery for 20 pieces of silver, which is very much like how Jesus was sold by Judas for 30 pieces of silver later on. But God was working through all of the difficulty and heartache that Joseph went through. He ends up in Egypt, working for a man named Potiphar, who was a high-ranking official. And everything that Joseph did was blessed. And so Potiphar put him in charge of everything in his household, and everything flourished under Joseph's care. Well, then Potiphar's wife decided she wanted more of Joseph, but he ran away from her, and then she unjustly accused him and had him thrown in prison. But God even blessed Joseph there. He became the favorite of the prison guard, the guy in charge of the prison. He put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners. And eventually, God gave Joseph the ability to interpret the dreams of two men in prison. The Pharaoh's own cupbearer and a baker, for a royal baker. One of them was restored to his seat to his place. The cupbearer went back to serving Pharaoh again, but the baker was executed. And both the interpretations came true. The cupbearer, of course, forgot about him and left him there for years. But then one day Pharaoh started having some disturbing dreams and no one could interpret them. And then the cupbearer remembered Joseph and how he had interpreted his dream for him. So he told Pharaoh. Pharaoh had Joseph come, and Joseph gave the interpretation of these dreams. Both of them were the same thing, that there would be 7 years of plenty, enormous crops, and then followed by 7 years of famine. And so Pharaoh said, "What should we do?" And Joseph said, "Well, you should put somebody who's wise in charge of storing up all the grain so that there's plenty for the years of famine." Pharaoh said, "You're the guy for the job." And so Joseph, this slave, betrayed by his brothers, far away from home, becomes second in command of all of Egypt. And of course, that sets up the fulfillment of Joseph's own dreams, as we'll hear this coming week. Well, thanks for reading along through the Bible this week. I encourage you to share your own thoughts and reflections in the comments below. It's great to be journeying together through God's Word this year. Hope to see you in person or online for worship at 8:30 and 10:45. And our annual meeting will be this weekend at 9:30. We'll be broadcasting some of the reports and the updates from our ministry. And then when we get to the business portion of the meeting, that will be in person only. So hope to see you in person if you can, or online. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the snow.